Hey, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. Thanks. Really nice to see you guys again.
So without much ado, I want to welcome Camilla Nontra.
Yay!
Oh my goodness. I should come to you every day when I'm feeling what I need.
Correct. This is Sudan.
Wow.
Sudan. Believe it or not, Sudan has more pyramids than Egypt.
Interesting.
Begin to think in a Pan-African way, because they now see that their conditions are not just about that local space, but the condition is linked to all of the other.
Hello. Good morning from California. Good afternoon if you live on the East Coast. Good evening if you live in the GMT time zone. I want to start by thanking God. We thank God for today. By Him we live, we move, and have our being. Welcome to the Pan-Africanism show. My name is Fred Nontra. I'm here with my guest, Mr. Jesse McCoy. How you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, we have another great show today. We have a guest coming all the way from Ohio, and she's originally from Cameroon, and also has a background from Kenya. So if we talk about AU, well, she embodies AU, the African Union. She's a PhD candidate at Ohio University studying media arts, and she's also a Pan-African enthusiast, and she believes we need to be in the media. So I'm going to let her tell a story. Without much ado, let's welcome to the show, M.M. Chumbow.
Yay!
Thanks for that intro, Fred. That was that made me feel like I am a big deal, which I am, by the way, just to make sure I'm a big deal. But that made me feel special. I blow my own trumpet a lot, so it feels nice to have someone else blow my trumpet for me. So my name is Mary-Magdalene Chumbow. So my dad calls me MM, and it's transitioned to everybody calling me MM. So feel free to call me MM. Some people call me Chumbow. But since there are many Chumbos in the world, if we happen to be in a room with people from my family, you'd better clarify which Chumbo you're referring to. And I am originally from Cameroon. So I was born in Cameroon, but raised in Kenya, and I studied in Uganda.
Wow.
So I studied in both Kenya, Uganda, and I did a bit of studying in Cameroon too, but most of my studying was in East Africa. And now I'm in Ohio. I came here for my master's program, and then now I continued because the project I was doing was just like a preliminary step towards what I actually wanted to do, which was an actual bigger project. And so it only made sense to continue into a PhD program so that I could get the opportunity to work more on what I wanted to do.
Wow. Well, I want to start off because you gave us a whole bunch of different geographic regions. And for our audience who may not be familiar with all those, because I know there are some people who may not be familiar with Cameroon, may not be familiar with Kenya, may not be familiar with Uganda, and some people who may not be familiar with Ohio in the United States of America. Can you explain to us kind of what was your experience like in those places, and what do you think are the main differences in each one of those places?
So okay, let's start with Cameroon because that's where I come from. And most of my experience with Cameroon has been from outside. So the Cameroonians I've met, most of them are Cameroonians I've met outside Cameroon, either in Kenya, Uganda, whenever I travel like to France or Italy or here in the US. So most of my attachment or forming my culture, my cultural identity as a woman from my dad's tribe or my mom's tribe has been through what my parents taught me first while I was growing up, and then through what I have learned when I attended meetings. So we used to have monthly meetings for Cameroonians in Nairobi, for example. So I would get to know the culture, different cultures. At that point, I was mixing everything because I didn't know what was for what. But then I came to the US and I met more of my family members, like actual cousins. And then I understood, oh, this is what happens in this family. And this is my grandmother. And then there's other grandmothers I have, but this is my dad's actual family. Okay, we are a whole family. And then you wouldn't know the difference. We are all cousins. We never discriminate. We never say, hey, I'm from this grandmother, you're from this grandmother. But I just started learning when I came here that, okay, so there is actually different families. When maybe there's a function, then you guys have to contribute in terms of your family, in your homes, like your grandmother's home. But in general, there's never been like a situation. Apart from that, there's no difference. You wouldn't tell because we all use the surname Chumbow. And I realized that that's how the culture is back home. And then the few times that I've traveled back home or when I studied there for a year, then I made some friends and I learned a bit about the culture there. But most of my identity was formed in Kenya. So I grew up there. I went there. The first time we went to Kenya, I was 3 years old. So I was a baby. So, and my dad was a preacher's kid. Was a preacher, so I was a preacher's kid. Yeah. And so I grew up with people around us. So the Kenyans, we grew up with Kenyans around us. We also had, because my dad was in charge of the ministry, which we are part of in East Africa. So we had people coming from Uganda as well, from Tanzania, from Rwanda. And we also used to go to Uganda a lot as kids for holidays, for youth camp, for Bible camps. So I learned Swahili. Later on, when I went to study in Uganda, I learned a lot of Luganda and just learned a lot about the culture in Kenya. I can understand a few languages, like a few words from certain languages, the popular languages like Luo or Kikuyu and Nubian, because when we first moved to Kenya, we lived in an area called Kibera, and that is where we started the ministry. And then we moved to somewhere called Lavington, and our next door neighbor was also a Nubian. And in Kibera, we lived around a lot of Nubians and Luos. So my identity was formed around Luos and Nubians. And then when we moved in again, our house was right in between one Nubian on this side and a Luo on this side. And that's how we've lived our whole lives. So the Nubian on this side, his first wife, that's where she lived. So we grew up with their kids this side, and then on this side is a Luo family, and so that's my identity basically. And then my best friends are Kamba and Kikuyu, so Meru. So I have a mixture of a lot of identities.
Okay, yeah. Definitely United Nations. Upbringing.
Yes.
That's why I give her the AU, because she embodies the AU, the African Union. Talked about
Hopefully I get to work there one day. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, to bring a change, right?
Yeah.
To bring change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you talked about this different. You talked about Kenya. You talked about Uganda. You talked about Kikuyu, Luo, and then
Meru.
Meru, yeah. So what do you think is, so someone once asked me, is there an African worldview? Well, with you, I mean, I've gotten to see different Africans and how we act, and most of us are similar, and then we also quite different. So would you think, the first question is there an African worldview? And the second, do you think you embody that? If there is.
So I have to put a disclaimer. My assumption or my belief of what the African worldview that exists will be mostly informed from a very privileged point. So educated, well-traveled, and having interacted with diverse groups of African communities. So I'm not really trying to speak for all Africans, but I would say that yes, there's an African worldview. There is the first thing that comes out for me when we talk about Africa is unity. Africans, we are united. As much as we have tribalism and we have all these things that people complain about, corruption, everything, but here, like here in the West, when you're walking around and you see an African, whether they're from a country that you've never even heard of before you came to the US, you'll just be like, oh, you're African, and you instantly click. There is that sense of community, especially where I am here in Ohio, here in Athens, Ohio, in the university that I am in. We have like the strongest international student club. African Students Union at Ohio University is one of the most active, most united, whether someone is celebrating something or mourning a loss of someone, that is when you will know that, wow, Africans do have that sense of unity. And it all comes from the word Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. So there's no way an African can survive without having people around them. We are not islands. Even back home, there's a saying where it takes a village to raise a child, and if a village rejects a child, it's the same child who's going to come and burn down the entire village to feel their warmth and embrace, right? So we all have to come together. And I think as much as we have all this corruption and any other issues that we have been facing, which are a lot and not a thing to joke about, there's one thing that always comes together. As for instance, as Kenyans, growing up in Kenya, I used to also just be part of the Kenyan community. We can talk back to each other. We can abuse each other. It's just like in a home. Siblings can fight, but don't you dare touch my sister. No, that's when you'll know, hey, no, don't come close. So yeah, so there's that sense of unity. And me, I feel like that's the first thing, like when I think about what's an African worldview, that is exactly it. Ubuntu. I am because we are. And that is what I embrace as well. So here where I am, I'm part of the International Student Committee that welcomes in students during International Student Orientation Week. And most of the people, I will not discriminate and say I'm only going to work with Africans, but I really find myself, a lot of the students who even drew close to me and who ask for my help and who keep in touch happen to be Africans. And throughout the years, I've really been supportive of them. And it's because someone else was supportive of me when I first came, and it happened to be Africans, not from Cameroon, not from Kenya. I later on met Kenyans, but it was a Ghanaian here, an Egyptian there. So not only from sub-Saharan Africa, but from Africa in general. So just carrying on the tradition.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a moment in the wilderness that's very well put, Chumbow.
Thank you. That's my friend Jackie.
Hey, Jackie.
Hi, Jackie, and Tigaboo Desmond says, cool, my people.
That's also a friend. Hi, Desmond.
Thanks, Desmond. Thanks for joining us. So, I don't know whether JC had a question. I don't know, a follow-up question to that.
I was going to ask, so, we want to celebrate education around here, and you're working on a PhD. What is your PhD focused on?
So I'm in the Media Arts and Studies program. So I'm majoring in communication, and I'm basically my focus has always been sexual gender-based violence. And first, the big umbrella or the big house is feminism and women and girls and children. So the vulnerable in society. But now I narrowed it down to sexual gender-based violence. And I started with Cameroon. So for my master's, I looked at one practice which is no longer as prevalent as it used to be, but is practiced in Cameroon a lot, which is breast ironing. And then now for my PhD, I am looking at another practice that is practiced in Kenya, where I grew up, which is female genital cutting, which is basically like female circumcision, and has been defined by the World Health Organization as a sexual gender-based violent practice. But the way I'm looking at it is I want to understand the practice itself from the point of view of the African women who live in communities where it has been practiced, people who've gone through it. how do they see it? Because there's a lot of literature on how it's a bad practice, but there's also some literature from African women who've gone through it who are like, don't just condemn our practice before you know why we do it, before you understand what it means to us. So I want to understand it from the perspective of people who actually have lived through it. I am not going to, I use a lot of literature from African authors to bring both sides which are being presented, and then now I will be able to inform my own understanding of this practice after I've gone out and been among these people and understand what they see, how they see it, and if they feel like it is bad or good or neutral, and whether they think it can be eliminated or banned, because we can't just start saying let's ban this practice just because the West is saying that it's bad. That's what they say. The West sets a standard and we all have to follow. Who said that that's the standard we all have to follow, right? So that is actually one of the main arguments in my dissertation, because it's like we have it classified as a sexual gender-based violent practice. We have all these reasons why it's very bad, but very few people talk about some of the benefits and how we can negotiate these benefits and how we can negotiate these people's understanding of the practice and negotiate this understanding that it is a sexual gender-based violent practice and bring it to the platform, because it is a rite of passage for many women, for many girls into womanhood. So if we are telling them to stop doing it, what are we giving? What alternative then are we giving them? And that's where I think I am.
That's a very, very interesting perspective, because as you can imagine, so me being in the United States my whole life, the only thing we hear is the negative. We've never heard any. I didn't know that there was anybody who was even advocating for the practice. So that's big. I'm curious as to, like, how did you get involved in this discipline or in this line of work?
Sorry, can you repeat that part? That last part.
Kind of what inspired you to get involved in this?
Okay, so a lot of events. Growing up, I saw, being a preacher's kid, I saw many people come into our home, and especially most of them were women and kids. And as a child, I didn't understand. I was even usually very angry at my parents. You guys don't have time for us. I don't have my own space in my room. It's always full with people. I'll come back from school and there's someone already, 2 people on my bed, and I have to either go squeeze myself in my parents' room, and we all sleep in my parents' room because there's people in our rooms, or I'll end up sleeping in my bed, sharing it with 2 other people. Like, there was always people coming, and sometimes mothers and their kids. But later on, as I started growing up, I would eavesdrop on some of the stories, and then I would hear, oh, she was beaten by her husband, or the husband cheated on her and kicked her out, or brought a woman into the house while she was there. So there's just so many gory stories that I grew up. And then as an adult, they became even worse, because I now started understanding, wow, this is what's happening to women out there. And then Facebook, of course, and social media, I started following pages like Stop Rape Organization, which is in Cameroon, and Usikimia, which is basically saying don't keep quiet, which is an organization in Kenya, which does an amazing job. They started just in 2019, but they do an amazing job in advocating for the rights of people who are at risk of experiencing any form of sexual gender-based violence, or rescuing them. So they rescue, they have some safe houses, they have initiatives to support people who are vulnerable in society. So I started being like, wow, there's a lot going on. And it's not only women, but my interest is women, because growing up, it was women that I saw being mistreated, who used to come into our house, and kids. So I started my journey wanting to work with kids, especially because I have a son. He's 10. At that time, he was 7. And there were stories about kids being molested by family members. But it's harder to work with kids, especially if you're here in the US, because they might not give you permission to do it, because you need this permission from your institution's review board. And that would have taken long. I really wanted to work with kids when I started. But because of the trauma and perceived notion that these practices are very bad. You cannot be doing this with children unless you get consent from their parents, and the parents need to. And I'm thinking, this is not how it works in Africa, but it's okay. Since I need to be in line with what the review board wants, I can only work with adults for now. But I also realized even with adults, it's still, there's a lot going on.
Absolutely.
So I changed my perspective, and now I'm looking at women, and it's still a lot. Every day there's stories of femicide in different African countries. And those are the things that fill my timeline. Like if I open right now, that's all I'll be seeing before I reach like a post of a friend or something, because I've surrounded myself with all these organizations just to keep up. Kenya, Uganda, Cameroon. You wouldn't even know whether I'm a Cameroonian or a Kenyan or a Ugandan when I'm commenting there. I don't like differentiate because it's all the same issue around the world, around the continent.
Yeah, and this is certainly something that I feel like, I used to do a lot of domestic violence victims advocacy work here in the States. And you all would be surprised some of the stories that you hear about people and the links that they go to escape these situations, or even the things they had to endure before they were able to escape these situations. So I definitely commend everything that you're doing.
Yeah. So we have a first question from our number one fan, Michael.
Michael.
Yeah, how you doing, Michael? He says, I love your emphasis on the unity of Africans in the diaspora, and by necessary extension, unity of Africans back home. My question revolves around the education of the African girl child. What is the importance of education for the African girl child?
The importance of education for the African girl child just starts with the fact that women are what we call women are the source of life, right? So if you educate your girl child, if you educate your daughter, tomorrow she's going to be a source of life to someone else. And even if it's a man or a woman, that person is also going to be inspired, because mothers have a really strong influence on who we are. And if you educate a woman, they say if you educate a woman, you're educating a nation, which is true because we are the source of life. So I feel like that's very important, that there should be an emphasis on educating girl children, which is something that we know that back home, there's some villages and communities where emphasis is not really put on educating the girl child. And many of the children are sold off to marriage, mainly because of poverty and things like that. So it's not only because the parents want to do it, but because of the socioeconomic factors and things that are surrounding the situation. So we all have to work together, like collaborated efforts, the government, policies implemented, administration, health workers, community social workers, parents, children, everybody in the community needs to work together. It's not only on the parents to get the child educated, teachers, everybody, because if there's nothing to be done, since we are in communities where bride price is paid for female children, parents are just going to resort to that, because an old man is going to come, an old rich man who can give them 100 cows, and say, hey, I want your daughter, I'll give you 100 cows. And if I have no cows, I'm unable to feed my family. And I have a daughter, I'll be like, yeah, sure. And if I wasn't also educated as the mother, I wouldn't even try to argue with my husband. I'll be like, yeah. But if I'm educated and my husband is educated and we're both working, and we, as much as we're struggling, we're able to have basic needs met for our family, and the government has also given free education to these kids, at least up to primary school level or high school level, then the situation is more conducive for all my children to go to school, not only the boys. And I think that's important. So
that's a great point. And I think that you are kind of a testament to that, because now you're educating us on all these issues that are going on a global scale, so we can take that back into our community. And they say children have to do more than their parents. So I keep telling my son he's gonna have to do like 2 PhDs. He's gonna have to keep up with me and do 2 PhDs, which he doesn't like. He wants to go to the NBA, but I'm like,
A woman cannot have more education than you. You better.
I had that dream too.
That's why I put my feminism aside and be like, okay, yes, I'm a woman, and you're a man. You should do better than me here. But yeah.
All right. So we have a few of your fans. Someone from all the way from Uganda. Thanks for joining us.
That used to be my high school schoolmate. She's my OG, old girl from high school. Shout out to that school. Thanks, Jane.
And then
that one too, Shamim. She's now in the UAE. Thanks for watching.
And then
he's also in the UAE. Yeah, Dubai. Yeah.
And then I think she's been with us. A good girl. You educate the whole
and
community.
I saw also my aunt from Cameroon was commenting earlier on.
Oh wow!
Thank you guys for watching. You should watch my YouTube channel this way.
Well, if you didn't know already, we'll share that information after. Well, MM is also a YouTuber. And her YouTube channel is Bean Chumbow. Chumbow. I have to pronounce it right. And she journals her experience with her son, the things she goes through with her son, and it's pretty cool. Just check her out when you get a chance. Well, I have you made a comment on your, we always do. Me and Jesse are notorious for checking out our guests. So there was a quote that I used in promoting our show today, where you said, "I am passionate about being able to tell the real African stories, not what the West would like to tell the world about Africa. And in order to do that, I needed to expand my horizon of knowledge on global issues to do with communication as well as development." Can you expound on that? And
I don't even. I saw that comment and I was like, "Wow! I know I said this before, but where did I say it?" I was like, "Wow! These people really went to lengths to find something." So did I say it? Where did I say it?
Oh, it's on the page. It's on your international. I think international Ohio international. International
communication and development page.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was my master's program. Okay, that makes sense. So, so before I came to the US, and before there was a job I used to do before the job I used to do, which brought me here. Okay, so when I finished my third year in college, Kenya does 4 years. I started working with African Media Initiative, which is AMI, AMI. And the CEO was a Cameroonian broadcast journalist veteran. He's called Eric Chinje. So I worked closely with him, and that was one thing he always used to say. We need to tell the African stories from our perspective. And it kept ringing in my head as a media student. Those days I was so like, wow. Like I used to look at him and be like, I need to be like this man one day. Like he's very like well-spoken and very soft-spoken as well, but when he says something, it will ring in your ears for life. So that thing stuck with me, and I kept wondering what he meant by that. But working with him for like a year, I understood what he meant. Like he started an awards show called Zimeo, which was only for African journalists across Africa who told African stories. So they went into communities and maybe featured elephants or something authentically about Africa, and not only about the bad side of Africa. So that is what I was like, oh wow, this makes sense. As Africans, probably what maybe is always on the headlines, the scandal, not Chickengate scandal, but whatever corruption scandal.
Yeah.
Whatever prime minister or president who has done this and that and that, very few headlines are about succeeding, about something, a huge step that we are making forward, about even a random Kenyan citizen who's doing this amazing thing in the West or wherever. But when you look at the headlines about like what's happening in the West from the websites of African newspapers, it's always good stuff. Then when you come to the Western newspapers website, you're always seeing, yes, you might see a few scandals here and there, but their headlines always start with things like the president has signed a deal, or this law has been passed, and this number of people have been vaccinated for COVID. There's just this huge progress we are talking about. Then when you go to the same website and go to the African section, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, it's always like, why are we always talking? I know that scandals sell, and that's a notion that has stuck in the minds of a lot of journalists. I know that even in school, as a journalism student in my undergrad, we were told sex sells. So like a film major when I was doing film. Sex sells, and you always, like when you're doing your project, you're thinking, can I input something here? So we had a project and we did a rape scene somewhere there. Like, it's like, you have to think of such like horrific scandals to make it part, and a corrupt politician somewhere, and kids doing drugs somewhere. And it's like, we're doing the same thing, but it's also being done in the West. They're also doing the same thing about us. While we are also telling their stories positively, they're still telling our stories negatively. For example, when the bombing in Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi happened a few years ago, what did CNN write? Blood bath? Something like, it was like, what? And Kenyans went on Twitter and shut them down quickly, and they retracted, but still, you can tell that they're used to doing this. And so I feel like it's important from a media perspective, because that's my background. It's important to tell stories from the root, and not only bad stories. And that's why I'm going in, like on with my research, I'm going in as someone who just doesn't understand what this practice is, and I want you guys to tell me. I know what the books are saying. I know what the West is saying. I know what people who are educated, Africans as well as non-Africans, are saying, but I want you people who live in the situation to say what it is to you. And I need to understand it from that perspective.
That's deep. I got a million questions. I got a million questions. Okay. So the first question I have is, you being involved in the media, when you got to the United States, what was it like seeing this whole new kind of Western sensationalization of all things, you know, scandal related, sex related, whatever, compared to what you were accustomed to prior to getting here? Like, how was that conversation when you opened up the first American newspaper? You like, what is this? How do you like process that?
Oh, Lord. First of all, let me say a big shout out to my mom. She just posted there. That was my mom, Mary-Magdalene Chumbow.
Okay, let's give it a shout out, please. Let's do that. I felt congrats, girl.
Mommy. I still call her my mommy. So
thanks, mom. Joining us.
So, wow. When I first came to the US, my impression was completely different, because even though I was someone who was coming to do my master's, that means I already had my first degree, and I was in the media field. That means I had a lot of influence. Like my professor, one of my film professors, studied in the US. His film career started in the US. So it was like, I thought, and my university was actually US. It was founded by a US couple who settled in Kenya. It's called Daystar University, and some of our faculty and staff were Americans, and we always had exchange students from the US. But still, I still thought this was the best, like not the best, because I had been to Europe and I really loved Europe. I love the fashion there, and I love the countries there. I've been to like 4 European countries, but I still was like, I did not expect it. You're driving and you're seeing all these strip malls, and you're like, coming from Nairobi, where there's all these skyscrapers and tall buildings, and then you're driving through Maryland and you're like, wow.
Yep.
The airports are good. And then you come outside and then you're like, Washington, D.C. is good. Okay. And then you keep driving. Maryland. Okay. The houses are nice, but outside is like strip malls. And then there's people on the road.
Uh-oh.
Athens.
Okay. I think she's.
Could you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you now.
Oh, did I hang for a while?
Yeah, just a few seconds.
Okay, yeah. So I was just saying, like, and then I came to Athens, and it was even worse. It's like, wow. It's a village.
They write stories about Ohio.
Like I keep saying, it's a village. It's a village. For someone who's lived her whole life in cities, it is, for me, it was a village. And then I mean, there's the benefits of constant electricity, constant running water, constant this. Like you can always call your landlord, hey, I need this fixed ASAP, and they'll show up and they'll fix it for you. That was a new concept for me, because back home, once you've rented a house, you're the one who's in charge of taking care of everything. So, but at the end of the day, I was like, so they don't really tell these stories. It's always the New York, the Times Square Plaza, Square, and Times Square.
Times Square. Mm-hmm.
So Times Square is always Manhattan, Upper East Side. I remember 90210, Upper East Side.
Yep.
Upper East Side, Manhattan, and California. It's never downtown LA. It's always, apart from the Hollywood Walk. But you don't even see a lot of that. You only see the fancy life. You see skyscrapers. You see you hear about Chicago, you're thinking, oh, wow, it's the best place. And then when you're here, now you know that it's one of the cities with the highest rates of violence and murder or whatever. And then you're here in Athens, Ohio, you're realizing there's a lot of poverty in this region. It's one of the poorest regions in Ohio. And you just, within the town, you don't see it. But just drive a few meters or a few miles into the woods, and you will see that there are homeless people. There are people whose kids survive on the meals provided in school because their parents cannot afford. There are people who, in a day, they live on less than $1, which is basically what they keep saying in Africa, that Africans live in less than. Then I'm like, okay, I'm not saying you're the West, you want to show how powerful you are, but why don't you ever talk about these people? Why?
I can answer.
And then you see how, especially then you now start looking at other complexities like racism, and then you realize people like me are really suffering in this country. And it's like, what is going on? I'm coming from a country where, yes, there's all this corruption and blah, 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 but I've never been discriminated against. My school system, if I can afford to go to this school, I will go to this school, and the school supplies and everything will be the same, not because I'm from a certain region, which is for poor people or whatever. Things are going to be as you can afford, which is a system I like. And then realizing a lot of people live on debt, which is like, wow, student loans are crazy. Student loans are crazy. People are renting even furniture. It's like you're leasing furniture. I'm like, back home, if I own a house, I bought it straight up. I bought land, I built it straight up. If I own a car, I paid for it cash. If I have an iPhone 12, I paid for it cash. It's not monthly pay. Like, it's always a system of, in my mailbox, there's a lot of credit cards, pre-approved. I'm like, why am I being pre-approved for all this? I do not want that. And so it's like a different system and a different reality from what we are shown when we're back home. So, yeah.
See, this is why I like these conversations. We get into the meat of it now, right? Because what is so funny to me is we have these perspectives of people who are from all over the world. And I hear it as somebody who grew up here and who understands firsthand how poverty in America works, but gets sensationalized or removed, I should say, erased from the media and what they put out. Yet the negative images, like, they don't talk about any of the good stuff that Black people do here. They talk about the negative stuff that Black people do here. And they send that over the world, just like for Africa in general, they'll tell us about what they say it is. But then when you start talking to people who are actually from Africa, it's not like that at all. And you get tons of, like, even your description of talking about being in Nairobi and seeing skyscrapers. Do you realize that people here have no concept that there are skyscrapers in Nairobi. Like it's just not what's presented here. And I think part of that, and we talk about this every week, I think part of that is kind of a European-centric push to keep us divided, right? To keep some people feeling like we can't be better than this, so you should be thankful for the scraps that you get, as opposed to knowing that you come from a civilization that has so much more, right? So that brings me to my next question. What inspired you into Pan-Africanism? What made you feel like this is something that I really want to embrace?
Jesse, before we go there, and I was actually going to ask that question, but we'll go with Jesse's question. Just go through the comments before we lose. So
yes, sorry, don't want to lose anybody.
Shout out to everyone. So proud of you, Han. This is Sharon Kiruja.
That's my best friend of 20 years. Oh, 15 years.
Feeling very well represented.
She's in Somalia right now, Somalia. So.
Wow. And then it says, Athens is not what I anticipated it to be. And
my mom is talking about, we are showing New York and Las Vegas. Yeah.
Las Vegas. Yes. Okay, I'm doing my community service for one of my classes. I could not imagine the level of poverty.
It's real.
Yeah. And then Michael says, this indeed an eye-opener. You mean poverty exists in almighty United States? Yet they always want to demarket Africa, even though we have an amazing life back in the continent. That's right, Mike.
The food is what amazing.
and I just want to emphasize, I mean, like, again, this is a concept for the people who are in control of the power structure here to do that. And what they do is they try to project these images so that they can create this image in people's heads that this is what it is. But if you talk to regular people in America, they don't subscribe to that, right? Like regular people in America who have any degree of education about what's going on in the world understand that this is all a ploy. But we also understand it's going to create division between different people from different places, which is the point of the power structure. They keep a limited number of people in power as long as they can keep everybody in the masses divided.
Right.
So, but anyway, I want to find out kind of what inspired you to get involved in Pan-Africanism.
Being born in one country, being raised in another, traveling to other countries, and having parents. So our ministry, I will credit this to the ministry I was born into. I was born a pastor's preacher's kid, and my ministry, Christian Missionary Fellowship International, which I was born into. Both my parents who were married met in that ministry and got married, and then had us in the ministry, and then went out as missionaries for that ministry. So I grew up basically in that. Even when I was like as young as 6, I knew about Lesotho, even though I'd never been there. And I knew about like Zanzibar, Madagascar, like countries around Africa, just based on, we have a missionary who's there and they need prayers, and we would spend time praying. So I knew the capital city of each African country. I knew their flags. I knew things like that. And my dad used to make us read a lot. So a lot of the books I got interested in. When we started reading, my dad had this big Shakespeare book, which had all his sonnets, and it was like an encyclopedia. It was this big. And that is what I read a lot. But then when I went, because the school that I started off with when we were living in Kibera was not as equipped with a good library and whatever. But when right before we moved to the other side where we were going to stay, my parents moved us to the city, to Nairobi Primary School, which is right in the city center in Nairobi. And so they have a vast library, very well funded, because it's right next to the State House, and a lot of politicians' ancestors went to that school. So it's colonial. It's still like colonial. It started in 1804 or something. So the colonialist kids went there. It's just a perfect place. Lovely. I love Nairobi Primary. So the library there was well stocked, but I was tired of Shakespeare books because I knew about Romeo and Juliet by the time I was in class 4. And I'm like, okay, now I need simple books. So I'll go to like the sections. But then what drew me most were Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe. I'll be reading stories about by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and I'm like, wow. Like I'm reading and it's like, this is something I can relate to. And I'm reading about this man who had to go to America and Nigeria and left the girlfriend, and the girlfriend got remarried. And it's like, this is something a bit more down to my level. And so I started by my literature. Yes, it might have started with Shakespeare, but a lot following those years, the rest of my 6 years was mainly, I borrowed a lot of books from that library, many of which I lost and my dad had to pay back. And many of which I was beaten for, because at school, I remember a teacher used to come and beat me because I always had a novel with me, and sometimes would take them away from me. My high school, especially, where I met Sharon, they have at least one full shelf of novels, which I brought to school and they grabbed from me, because they always grabbed, because class would be going on and I would have the book on my lap. And so my desk is there with the books, but I'm busy reading. And it was always, I'm not advocating for people to do that, but that was how engrossed, like when I started reading a book, I would want to keep reading. Then it moved me into starting to write. And when I started to write, I was writing stories based on my experience, based on things that were going on around me, and based on the literature that I was reading. So it wasn't, so I took a lot of African literature. I took literature as a subject through my high school. I always did well in English and literature. I could probably have done that for high school, but I wanted the spotlight. I wanted to be a journalist. And so, which has changed now. I no longer want to do that, but I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. But yeah, so that's where my Pan-Africanism started, with the books that I read, with the stories that I was told by my parents, with the prayers that we used to make for people all around Africa and the world, but mainly most of the missionaries were in Africa. And being able to travel even from a young age to different, to Uganda for Bible camp, and people from all over East Africa would be there. So yeah.
All right. So yeah, just to stay on Pan-Africanism, what do you think? What do you think some steps are? What do you think there's some practical steps you can take to bridge the gap between the diaspora and Africans from the continent?
Yes. Just first of all, remember that we're being put against each other every day. That's the first thing. Like, I know I've walked into like a barber shop to take my son to get his haircut, and then we got into a whole, it turned into an argument because those African Americans, there were African Americans there who were like, your ancestors sold us out, and then they didn't even fight for us. And why does African governments not come and fight for us here? And then I was also being like, well, you know that we also went through colonialism while you guys were going through slave. Actually, we had that. And yes, there might have been some chiefs and whatever who sold some people from their communities to get land or some privileges, but most of the Africans who were taken from the continent were grabbed. Were forced into it. Nobody sold them into anything. And that is because we studied about our colonialist history, our histories. We studied, like in Uganda, I took West African history. So I know a lot about what happened in West African countries. And in Kenya, I did a lot of East African history. So I know that that was the common thing. They grabbed people, they forced them into slavery. And it wasn't always that chiefs sold them for privileges. And then the other thing is, even now, after we got freedom, almost all African countries claim to be free from colonialism, we still are experiencing neo-colonialism. So we are still under the hands, the iron hands of all these Western countries. Cameroon, for example, our bank reserves are in France. We take loans from our own bank reserve, which is in that country. And there's policies. We cannot embark into any big developmental project without there go ahead, they have their say so. So there's all this complexities and levels of understanding that everybody needs to have. Even here in the US, when they say, okay, some Black people, African Americans will be like, Africans are taking away our opportunities for jobs or scholarships or funding. It's like, I came to understand sometimes they give it to us to spite the African Americans and then to put us to start fighting. It's like, so African Americans will be like, I don't like this one. She was given this position because, or maybe there's like summer jobs we have, and then you're made like the team lead or the education lead, and then someone else under you, and it's like, oh, I don't like her. She doesn't know anything, basically because of what they've been told about Africa. And you come with the notion that this African person who has been put in charge of this department does not know anything. And this African person is coming with an idea of how privileged they are. And I'm like, I'm better than all of you. I came all the way from Africa. I know what brought me to this country, so I worked hard for it, so I deserve this. And so we're all trying to prove our points to each other. And who's winning? Winning. And who's losing? And who is losing?
Yeah.
We are still losing because that 50,000 that I'm getting, there's someone at the table up there who's getting 2 million, and it's not somebody who looks like you and I. So,
so herein is the point that we get to every week, right?
Yeah.
The reason why people have positions to give is because they access and they have the control and power.
Right.
So if we can carve out the intermediary, if we can carve out the middle person and create our own institutions that will service our entire diaspora, then we can do it. Like, I am impressed with everybody that we've talked to about all of the resources, all of the educational resources, even natural resources that are there. But somehow, by the time it gets taken, refined, and shipped over here, what they do to us here is make us feel like we're crap unless we can get it. So we go out and try to get it so we can have the chain, we have whatever, and they charge us exorbitant rates or give us credit cards to keep us in debt. So it's all a system to pit us against each other. And I think what you were talking about is what we talk about all the time, where it's people who come in, people who get opportunities, and folks have a one-track mind to think, well, if I applied and I didn't get it, but somebody else applied and they got it, then they're taking something from me.
Right.
And my concept to them is, brother, they not taking from you. It was their institution. They are giving something to one person.
They decide.
Even they make money off of.
Yeah.
So
even when they say diversity and inclusion, how much inclusion over diversity? They are like, okay, we put one Black man on the board. That's enough. Like, that's how diverse we are. How inclusive are they? How inclusive does that man? How included does that Black man feel?
We go to the meetings, so we see who really in the meetings.
2 white women, 1 colored, I don't know, 1 colored non-binary person. Okay, now we've diversified our company. And it's like, okay, but how included do all those people that you are putting in your report as having diversified your community feel?
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to hop back on that, if you watched the show last week, our guest Ivy talked about the wall of defense, how in the northern part of Ghana people fought. It's not only Ghana, in Nigeria. Michael also gave an example in Nigeria. Different African countries fought back, but then when you come with guns and you have spears and swords,
right,
there's no way you could win that. So I mean, that's why we need to be educated. It's important that we all be educated on both sides, that we educate ourselves and see that we're one and we fought for each other, but it's just that when the forces that be were more powerful, we couldn't overcome it. So definitely education is important, and the media, and it's important. That's why we also created this, me and Jesse and Nkechi, shout out to Nkechi, Jairo. We created this so that we too have a voice. And the like Ivy said last week again, that it's not too saturated to add another African media source or Black media source, because our voices need to be heard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, So we have Michael again says, in Africa we have a mono race in the sense of one color of skin, so you always see yourself as belonging to the majority, save for tribal dominance. How do you feel being in the minority over there? Michael's from Nigeria, by the way. I don't think I said that before. He lives in Nigeria and is a lawyer.
Oh, okay. Well, it's sad. It's really sad. It's sad that I came from a point where. Do you want to go ahead with the comment, and then I can answer the question after you're done with the comment?
Okay, sure. Then our sister here says, the earlier we accept each other, the better for us. Normally we are lumped together as blacks, even when filling forms. Laugh out loud. Exactly. And so America is a land of opportunity for some which we lack in Africa. So when Africans come to the US, we work extra to achieve all the goals we planned to.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
So, where do I start? First of all, I came here with the notion that, well, I'm coming as a student, and then I'm coming to this college which is known for diversity and inclusion, and it's a town where there's a lot of all these people, different people. Like one thing that Ohio University has specialized in is diversity and inclusion, which is really good. Like in the whole town, you see the LGBTQ community, you see Black people. As much as we're in a PWI, we have a decent amount of colored people. We have international students from over 100 countries.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, we're here. But the reality is that's within the college town, with the college. But we've got the community, the real people who live around here, and many of them have never left Athens, they've never left Ohio. They still have this notion of they're better than this skin color. And Athens has some history of racism and stuff like that. I think a man was lynched here a few decades ago, so under a bridge somewhere. So there's a lot. So when I came, I did not think of myself as a minority. I did not even think of my skin color as much until I started working in a department in the school, and also started working, and also had my son start going to school. That's when I realized, wow, this is actually real. Like, there's people, as much as they are educated and have been exposed to children from different countries, from different regions of different skin colors, teachers themselves who are still very biased, very discriminatory against people of this skin color. Very, like, you'll get emails every day, your son did this, your son did that. And in my head, I'm like, I never got this back home. Like, this is not the person you're describing to me. And not only that, what happened to provoke my son to get to that point where you're telling me about this? And thirdly, what are you doing as a teacher to handle the situation? Why are you sending me emails all the time? Like, why do I? Until I decided to take it upon myself. I was like, anytime they sent me an email, I appeared at school. Let's just start this out right here in the middle of the school day, so that I can go ahead with my life and you can go ahead with your life, because I don't understand. And I think when I started pushing back, at first I used to be shouting at my son, why are you always doing this? Why are you doing that? And I even started telling my parents, let's pray for my son. I don't know what's going on. Why is he now becoming this person? And we came up with this behavior plan. Then I realized they don't do that for other kids. Why are they doing a behavior plan for a child who's 7 years old, who's just come into your community? Oh, we have like a space, like personal space. He does not respect personal space. Well, we come from a community where there's no personal space. I'll be talking and telling a story and I'll hit someone's shoulder. And that is my way of saying, are you hearing? And like, let's engage. So why is it him alone who has to adjust to you? I know that we have now come to your country, so we got to do like when you're in Rome. But if you want to be very inclusive, you should also think of ways that you can balance out people who are coming from a different culture and your culture, so that there's an understanding even with the kids. Okay, you need to learn, this is personal space, but give me time to also learn. I'm a child, I'm 7 years old. I'm coming from a place where I did this, and at home I'm always hugging him. He's always jumping on me. We're jumping in the house. So he's not just gonna stop that. He feels like when I'm with my friends, I can hold them, I can put my hand on their shoulders, and you're saying it's not allowed, but I'm seeing white kids do that.
That's what I was gonna say.
Is it because he's not? So first I was like, oh, maybe because he's African, but then I realized it's not only him, because I started talking to another parent who was a child who's not African and who's not Black, is Puerto Rican. So brown skin, and she also gets the same stuff. Then she told me we have a whole association called Athens Parents for Racial Equality. And I was like, wow, there's an actual association for this. Then this means that these people have been doing this whole thing based on this. So this is an established pattern. And that's when I was like, wow. My skin really does make me a minority in this country. As much as I'm educated or travel, blah, 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 just by virtue of having melanin in my skin, which I am proud of, and which, like all royalty in this world, all human beings came from Africa. So I don't understand why you people will think that me, the source of life to the whole world, is okay. I'm being a bit, but
no, you're 100% right.
Is a minority. Like, why would you think that? So that's something that I'm still battling with every day. I make sure to believe my child first. I make sure to know my worth and my value, and to let him know what his worth and value is. I know they have stereotypes, so they expect, like, there was a time I couldn't pick him up because I was with my mom in the store, and the bus dropped him off, and he was 7 years old. And we thought, okay, well, the door is open. My housemate was in the house. He should just be able, they were right at the door. He should be able to go in and enter the house. But they went back with him to school, and they were calling back. They were calling, and my phone for some reason was off. So they called my sister. They said they were going to call child services, and they were going to call. And then they called the cops to come to my house. The cops were knocking at the door. And when I got to the school, I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is what happened, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to explain. They were holding my child back from me. And I was like, wait a minute. You wouldn't do that. Like, first of all, wait, you called cops to my house? They were like, yes, we thought that something might have happened. You were inside the house probably. I'm like, wait, did you think I was on drugs, blacked out in the house, or what? Like, why would you call cops on me? So something bad happened to me. Like, I get that they might have been trying to just show concern, but no, not to that extent. That's when I started questioning a lot of stuff that is done out of, well, we were just concerned about you. It's like, okay. But if you're concerned, there's another way you could show your concern other than whatever you were implying. And so it's been a journey. It's a real journey, but as time goes by, we learn how to wisely use wisdom in how we deal with people. Like, we learn how to identify it and learn even before it happens, and then learn how to work around it and live with the people who live around us. So it's like, I don't go everywhere expecting to be discriminated, but I can tell from certain language and certain looks and certain smiles, there's that, it's like they're scared of you. It's like, So yeah.
This is a great conversation. So for the people who are watching us from the continent, I hope you all understand this is a primer on how life is in the United States when you're Black. This is a primer. And we've seen already, y'all saw the Derek Chauvin trial with the guy who killed George Floyd. You see how, police brutality and all these things happen. Like, this is real. And it's one of those things where the saddest part about it is these things happen, but yet there's still this image projected that we somehow did something wrong. Like we were not listening. We didn't comply. We didn't do this.
Right.
And it doesn't, I don't even think we deserved it. Right. I don't even think it's, I don't think that this is going to sound bad. I don't think the people who are in control of these power structures even look at it from a cultural divisiveness standpoint. I think that there's a certain paintbrush they painted you with when you show up and you're Black. That's all it is.
Right.
They're not going to see are you Ghanaian? Are you Nigerian? Are you from America? They don't care, right? I don't care. You show up and you're Black, you're automatically on drugs. You're automatically an unfit parent. You're automatically guilty, whatever the case may be. And these are the challenges that we all are trying to deal with in a system that we have been pillaged by and that is largely still under their control. So I say all that to say, I need us as a people like this to come together and create our own industries and institutions that serve us, that employ us, that help us do things that, we already take for granted or already are operating in the system anyway. Yeah. We don't need their banks. Like we don't need that. We can do it ourselves.
Support Black, buy Black, do Black, anything like because internationally,
like globally, and then we can expose. Because I think if we have more like exposure and we're more set up to travel and see each other and hang out and have fellowship, I think we will see that this has all been a smokescreen this whole time in order to keep us divided. In some cases, to keep us impoverished and to keep us from accessing the information. And the last thing I'll say is I love when we talk about history, because in America, of course, they whitewash history and make it seem like, oh, yeah, people sold y'all. They didn't want y'all. And that's not true. We have people who have fought on both continents, people who have fought to the death to make sure that folks were free. And at the same time, they get painted out as the exception, right? And the whole thing about it is we have to understand that as a community, we are all one. It doesn't matter what your country of origin is. We have to navigate this power structure system in order to be able to be successful. And that could be just in your government apparatus and the colonialization that oversees, or it could be, more day to day. Like, I'm scared when I stop at a traffic light and I see a police officer pull up. Right. So I love these conversations. And I love it because I say these things a lot. And, of course, it can go in one ear and out the other because I'm here. But to hear somebody's transition, one, it gives me inspiration because I'm going to be traveling to the continent very soon. And it gives me inspiration to connect, meet with my people. But on the other hand, it gives me inspiration to continue fighting against all of these systems and injustices that we have to experience, because I don't want your view of America to be that, right? If you were in North Carolina, we could tell you, we take around Black people, first of all. I don't know what Athens is doing. Around Black people, get you some nice, good food, good people, and have a completely different experience with what they do. Right.
All right. So I think this might be your brother, right?
That's my daddy.
Your dad. Oh, wow. May God someday use you to solve some of the problems raised.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, Dad.
Amen.
Amen.
Absolutely.
All right. So, wow, it's already 1 hour already.
Oh, wow.
I know that went fast, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today. Please, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe, like our Facebook, comment, share this video with your friends, spread the word, and get others educated. Well, if you haven't done so already, you can also follow on, I'll show you a page shortly. Do you mind me sharing it?
I don't mind.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is a page, Bean Chumbow.
Hey, that's my page. Yay, so much color.
Yeah, go ahead and support her. And
yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So before you give out your contact info, I'm going to let our resident attorney give a disclaimer.
All right, people. We talk about this every week. All right. We had a wonderful guest on today. She's going to give you some social media information to contact her. This is not the time for you to pull up like you are Anthony Davis or LeBron James or Steph Curry or James Harden or any other shooter from half court and shoot shots.
Shoot your shot.
This is not the time. This is for professional conversation, dialogue, and building within our society. And I hope you all have been realizing her whole family has been watching this show. So if you say something inappropriate, it's going to be a lot of people coming after you. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah.
So the disclaimer is out there.
And the dad is a preacher too, so he could.
Yes.
So you better be careful.
Be very careful. Tread soft. Okay. All right.
All right. So please share your social media handles.
So you want me to say it? Okay, so I'm on Facebook, same name, Being Chumbow, Being Chumbow -TUFP. So it's the Ultimate Family Podcast, but in initials. And on Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, Being Chumbow. You're gonna find me there, Being Chumbow. Basically, that's it. I'm all about being Chumbow, and my email address is Chumbow Mary CHUMBOW MARY @gmail.com for business only. Business.
Exactly.
Business. I'm all about that business. Yeah. I don't know what else.
That's all.
Okay,
they
so
do.
like this.
That's all they do.
Chumbow Ngoom MM, which is on Facebook, but everything else on all platforms is Being Chumbow.
That's all they need. I can assure you there's at least one person who's watching this program is like, I'm gonna try anyway. I'm just
Well, they can try, but that doesn't mean they
we put the disclaimer out there. What happens happens.
That doesn't mean they're gonna succeed. Trying is very different from succeeding.
Well, that's Kechi, co-executive producer.
Yes.
Hi, Kechi. Nice to meet you.
And she says, great disclaimer.
Very great disclaimer.
Yes.
All right. So thanks for joining us. This is where we end.
Thank you so much.
Jesse, do we have enough time for trivia?
I'm down for trivia.
Okay, so now this time, if the audience doesn't get it, we're gonna give it to our guests. So you better get it.
Oh my. Okay. I'm ready.
You're ready. Okay. So who was the first president or who helped Mozambique gain independence? And that is 10 seconds. Okay, Jesse, we can start the countdown now.
Here we go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2,
nobody.
1.
Come on, my daddy.
oh.
I know you.
Time's up. Okay. Give us the answer.
Eduardo Mondlane. And I looked that up. I'm sorry, but I don't know if that's.
Oh, okay. Well, that's half an answer.
I didn't know, honestly. I didn't know. I just looked it up.
A moment. Well, that was the founder of Frelimo, which was the organization.
Right. Okay, so who was the first president?
That started again the march towards independence, but he was assassinated, and then our own Samora Machel is his name.
Oh, yes.
Who was popular for saying "A luta continua," the struggle continues.
Oh
yeah,
my God! How could I forget? Yes.
Yeah. So it's Samora Machel. Oh, Michael says I don't know. Michael has got all our gift cards, so someone else can get it.
Oh.
But yeah, so that's Samura Machel is the name.
Let me write that down so I can do my research.
Oh wow! I need to take a course, a refresher course on history, African history from secondary school.
Yeah, so he was once he gained independence in Mozambique and drove out the Portuguese. They actually fought back. They actually it was an armed struggle, and then the Portuguese went back and bombed the villages where the men, the farmers, the workers, the carpenters helped to help the revolution and gain independence. They went back and bombed the village with children and women.
Wow.
Yeah. So he did not just settle there. Then he wanted South Africa. Back then, South Africa was under apartheid, so he started fighting them too. But one day, when he went he traveled and was coming back. He was shot down by, and a lot believe was South African intelligence. His plane was shot down. So he passed away in 1985.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's just a quick lesson.
Great history lesson right there.
All right. So thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. This has been wonderful.
Again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining. Oh, don't go yet. We'll meet you backstage.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
All right. So
thanks everybody for coming.
Yes, thank you all.